Welcome to another episode of Out from the Horrorbox. I'm your affected host, Dom, and in this episode we'll be taking a look at the novel, originally published in 1978 and reprinted in 1990 as the Complete and Uncut Edition from Stephen King. This novel is considered by critics and fans to be Stephen King's best novel, but I'd probably rank it about my number 4. Honestly, when we get done with this, I'll probably give you my top 5, not this episode, but getting through before the Dark Towers, I'll probably give you my top 5 or 10 Stephen King novels. There's just so many of them, and they're all just so great for the most part. Some are, I'd say, like, but this one, well, it's up there. Stephen King's The Stand centers on a deadly pandemic of weaponized influenza and its aftermath, in which the few surviving humans gather into factions that are each led by a personification of either good or evil and seem fated to clash with each other. So, without delay, let's see what a world would look like if a super flu wiped out a huge portion of our population and a madman was made a leader. That can't happen, right? Here in 2024, the future, soon to be 2025, the further future, from whenever this came out. Oh yeah, 1978. How very timely, right? The Stand was originally published in 1978 in hardcover and was set in 1980, but this was the abridged form. That first paperback release in 1980 was changed and brought the setting date up to 1985. The novel marks the first appearance of a character who we'll get into because this character will reoccur in future novels and may be important to the Dark Tower series. In 1990, an unabridged edition of The Stand was published, billed as the Complete and Uncut Edition, published in hardcover by Doubleday in May of 1990, and this became King's longest book published. Even now, I think it was the longest until this one was published. So without the Complete and Uncut version, if you just go by the original published version of The Stand, it would be longer, but this one, I think, gets it by like 100 pages or something. So when the novel was originally published, Doubleday warned King that the book size would make it too expensive for the market to bear. But I think as time has gone on, and we've gotten like longer novels, and we've gotten used to things like George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire, and each one is like hundreds of pages. I think this would have been okay. I think now, if you release something like this now, I think people would be at least intrigued. So as a result, he cut about 400 pages from the original manuscript, and the edition, the Complete and Uncut, reinstates most of the deletions, which were selected by King himself, and updates the setting from 1980 to the 1990s. And then in Dance Macabre, it's not a novel, it's kind of like his treatise on the horror genre itself, him going through and like explaining how he thinks horror works and his fascination with horror. It's a pretty good read. I haven't read it. I've read parts of it, but I heard it's really good. He gets into like why certain things work, why certain things don't work, and whatever. But King wrote about the origins of The Stand in that novel, or in that it might be called more like a memoir kind of. One source was Patty Hearst's case. The original idea was to create a novel about that episode because it seemed that only a novel might really succeed explaining all the contradictions. The author also mentions George R. Stewart's novel Earth Abides, which describes the odyssey of one of the last human survivors after the population is nearly annihilated by a plague, as one of the main inspirations. With my Patty Hearst book, I never found the right way in. And during that entire 6-week period, something else was nagging very quietly at the back of my mind. It was a news story I had read about an accidental CBW spill in Utah. This article called up memories of a novel called Earth Abides by George R. Stewart. And one day while sitting at my typewriter, I wrote, just to write something, the world comes to an end, but everybody in the SLA is somehow immune. Snake bit them. I looked at that for a while and then typed, no more gas shortages. That was sort of cheerful in a horrible sort of way. The Stand was also planned by King as an epic story akin to The Lord of the Rings in a contemporary American setting. For a long time, 10 years at least, I'd wanted to write a fantasy epic like The Lord of the Rings, only with an American setting. I just couldn't figure out how to do it. Then, after my wife and my kids and I moved to Boulder, Colorado, I saw a 60-minute segment on CBW, which was chemical biological warfare. I never forgot the gruesome footage of the test mice shuddering, convulsing, and dying, all in 20 seconds or less. That got me remembering a chemical spill in Utah that killed a bunch of sheep. These were canisters on their way to some burial ground. They fell off the truck and ruptured. I remember a news reporter saying if the winds had been blowing the other way, there was Salt Lake City. The incident later served as the basis of a movie called Rage, starring George C. Scott, but before it was released, I was deep into The Stand, finally writing my American fantasy epic set in a plague-decimated USA. Only instead of a hobbit, my hero is a Texan named Stu Redman, and instead of a Dark Lord, my villain was a ruthless drifter and supernatural madman named Randolph Flagg. The land of Mordor, where the shadows lie, according to Tolkien, was played by Las Vegas. So then while writing The Stand, King nearly stopped because of writer's block, and eventually he reached the conclusion. There's a part in the novel where we'll get to it that basically changes the whole line of where you're thinking the story is going to go. It kind of gets the characters to get where they need to go, because we'll get into it, but it's just crazy that it's like I think he kind of was getting too complacent with letting the characters kind of like start rebuilding things that like needed to get to get to the story, get on with it, and we'll see that when we get into the novel. Which let's just get right into The Stand. So just to kind of preference a little bit, I am going to be going into this as the complete and uncut version because this has the most complete version that King wanted for the story. It does include a prologue and an epilogue. So let's get right into the prologue. So at an army defense installation in the Mojave Desert, an extremely contagious and lethal strain of influenza is accidentally released. During that time, though, the laboratory staff dies, but security guard Charles Campion, whose only task was to monitor and to not let anyone in or out, he takes his family out of the state. He wakes them up in the middle of the night. It seems that the door that was supposed to lock and seal him into his guard booth in case something happened like this malfunctioned, and he was able to get out. So he gets his family together, gets them in the car, and starts driving. After a few days of driving, his car suddenly comes upon a small gas station in the little town of Arnett, Texas. At the gas station, we have a few men who are there hanging out, one of them being Stu Redman. Stu Redman is a quiet, intelligent widower and veteran who lives in Arnett, Texas, with kind of a tragic history. He's lost most of his family except for his brother, who lives in another state. He had to take care of his younger brother and his mom, who I believe was sick. I believe she got cancer and died very early on. So as they're sitting there, he notices the car is pulling up, so he shuts the gas off at the gas pumps, and that's when the car runs into them. They open the door, and that's when they notice that inside it's Campion and his wife, and they both, and their daughter, who all have bloated necks that look kind of blackish, and they have like snot running down their nose, and they look like death. And the only ones who's still kind of left alive is Campion, who's trying to keep the car from, running off the road, but unfortunately he ends up dying. And see, the story now kind of like skips over to different people here and there. We're going to kind of stick with Stu to kind of get him to get through his a little bit, because there are just so many characters in this novel, and you have to go from one to the other to the other. So I'm going to try and get as far as I can with each character before we need to move to another character, if that sounds okay with you guys. So Stu and the rest of the people in Arnett are rounded up, and at first they're just told it's because the government is like, oh, there's this might be spreading, and so we're just going to take everybody just as a precaution. And then he starts noticing that the other people in town are getting sick also, and so they take them to the Atlanta Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and that's where they start doing a bunch of tests on everybody, trying to see what's going on, and that they all start dying off one by one. And it comes down to Stu and I believe another little girl who they cannot figure out any other way that their system is being immune to this. And so then the little girl ends up dying, and they even put I think they put a hamster in his room, and the hamster ends up dying, or a guinea pig. And so they know hey, this guy is just some weirdly immune. So they move him up to Stovington, Vermont, for the disease center. And that's where they inject him with the pure strain of the virus, and they keep doing it to just see what happens. And his immune system just keeps killing it, but they can't create a cure from him. So eventually, one of the people who's in charge, he comes in and decides, what? Because he's sick, he's like, I'm just gonna get rid of Stu because, this is the last protocol, to kill him. And Stu is able to fend him off and kill him and get out. And as he's going through the halls, he notices all the people that are just stacked up and put on gurneys and just left in the hallways to die. And there's just bodies and bodies everywhere. And just the same thing. They have the bloated necks and the black, and they just look like they're sick, and they're just, the hallways are littered with the dead. And eventually he's able to get out after thinking he can hear someone chasing after him, and it leaves him kind of spooked. So he goes for a while, kind of wandering New England, and that's when he meets and befriends Glenn Bateman. And so from there, the people in Arnett, the gas station guy gives it to his cousin. He gives it to a cop. He gives it to some guy who's traveling on a plane. That guy infects everyone on the plane. Everyone on the plane infects everyone where they go, and it just starts spreading from there. Eventually, the journalists christen the flu as the super flu, or Captain Trips, and it spreads across the country and travels beyond the borders, and it triggers a global pandemic of apocalyptic proportions. Approximately 99.4% of the world's population infected and killed within a month. A prism of several personal tragedies describes the collapse of society, explosions of violence, and the inability of the government and martial law to stop the pandemic, and the near extinction of humanity. Many of the survivors of the virus also die, in like certain ways, like that are not caused by the virus. But before we start getting into like how it all collapses from there, we have to talk about some of the other characters that are very important. So let's get to Franny Goldsmith. Franny Goldsmith. She's a college student from Untitled, Maine, and she's pregnant in the book at the start. She just ended her relationship with the baby's father, Jess Ryder, who said he wanted to have an abortion, but she says that she doesn't want to do that. She wants to raise the child. So now she has to confront her mother, who her and her mother do not have a great relationship. Her mother, Carla, but she does have a great relationship with her and her father. But she tells her father, who has nothing but love and joy for her. But then when she does confront her mother about it, she gives her the cold shoulder and tells her that she's not going to raise it under her roof and throws her out. As the flu spreads through the whole community, she and a boy named Harold Lauder, her friend's younger brother, are the only survivors. Her father, after having buried her mother in the garden, just asks Franny to bury him there too. So when he passes, she does the same thing. But then she also starts having strange dreams of a man who's covered in black, not dressed in black, but he's just like black shadow, is trying to get her baby. And she told Harold of these nightmares, as they're the only ones left. And Harold decides that, hey, we need to get out of here, and we need to try and find other people, or try and get to at least to like the Stovington CDC center that's there. As they start making their way, he decides that the best way to get across would be with motorcycles. So he's able to figure out a way to get the pumps to work at the gas station to fill up the gas for the motorcycles, and then he ends up painting a sign on a barn letting everyone know if they get to that point, because Ungunquit's kind of like the end of where like the highway system ends, and so he puts a sign letting them know to go to the CDC center in Stovington. That's where they've gone, and so they leave from there. And once they get there, they encounter Stu Redmond. And while Franny decides that Stu can go with them, Lauder's kind of resistant. Harold is resistant, mainly due to his own feelings for Franny. And they decide to go back to Glenn Bateman's house. We'll get to Glenn Bateman in a few. But they decide to go back to... Stu takes them back to Glenn, and Glenn decides that, you know what, let's just go back to Stovington to confirm that, to see if everyone is dead like Stu had said, or like maybe they might be back there regrouping. So they do get there, and just as Stu had said, and they get to see for themselves, like everything just feels like a haunted house. And they decide, hey, like, we keep having these dreams of like this man in black, but then we also have this dream of this black woman in a cornfield. Like, what's that about? And they're like, well, she keeps saying to come, and they all kind of have the same dreams, except for Harold keeps saying he doesn't have these dreams, but she says in the dream to come to Nebraska, so that's where they decide to head to. Now to reverse a little bit back and get into Glenn Bateman. So Glenn Bateman was an associate professor of sociology who retired years before the super flu. Glendon Pequod Glenn Bateman. So Stu ends up meeting him in Woodsville, New Hampshire. He's sitting there painting in the woods by a river, and he explains to Stu that, you know, he doesn't really want to leave. He's old, you know, his joints hurt. That he's like, like you go on ahead, and if you do come back though, maybe I'll decide to go with you. So obviously when Stu meets with Franny and Harold, they start coming back, and that's when they run into Glenn again, and Glenn decides, yeah, you know what, I'll go with you. He also has a dog named Kojak, and Kojak's he just found Kojak one day. He named him Kojak. And from there, they start discussing, how they can rebuild society and like this and that. But also, that's when they start to describe their dreams about Mother Abigail, who is the woman that they keep dreaming of, telling them to come to Nebraska, come to Hemingford Home, Nebraska. That's where she lives on a little tract of land, and she keeps telling them in their dreams to come. But they also dream of the Dark Man. So Bateman decides to join them, and they start heading that way. Going back a little bit further, we're going to start with Larry Underwood. Larry is a young narcissistic singer-songwriter who is achieving significant success with his debut single, Baby Can You Dig Your Man. And with the overnight success of this, he's able to buy tons and tons of drugs. And so he's living in LA at the time, and as he's making his music, and he ends up getting into deep debt with a drug dealer. And so he has to go back to New York, where he's from, to hide. And, he kind of makes up some kind of story to his mom, because his mom, that's when he goes back to live with. But she's always just kind of been disappointed with him because, his one greatest flaw, and she tells him directly, you're a taker. You come home to me because you knew that I had to give. And, he tries to fight it off, but yeah, that's Larry. That's who Larry is. And the plague just starts ravaging through New York. He starts hearing people coughing, starts hearing people like sneeze. And even his mom, who's worked like so hard and so long for her whole life, never took time off or anything, she ends up getting sick and dying. And then, Larry, distraught, not knowing what to do, he decides, he's gonna try and get out of the city. And as he does, he meets a troubled middle-aged woman named Rita Blakemore. And the two decide to leave New York together. Now, Rita, she comes from like a hoity-toity, upper class kind of society. And, she likes getting taken care of. She can't really do too much for herself. And there's a part where he, like, we have to go through the Lincoln Tunnel to get out of the city. And she's like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, you got to. And she leaves, but then as he's starting to make his way through, she shows up again because she decided, to go with them. And then, they finally get out of the city, and that's when, as he's sleeping, he wakes up and he finds out that she's overdosed on drugs and she died. And he feels guilty because he's relieved that he doesn't have to deal with her anymore. But, it's like this kind of like thing of like, man, she was such a burden, but I'm kind of glad I got rid of her. But he's also having these dreams of this dark man, and he starts also seeing this woman, this old black woman, and as he's going, he just keeps going east, and as he keeps going, he's kind of in this like semi catatonic state of self-reflection, and he collapses from exhaustion in New Hampshire. And that's when he wakes up after the night's sleep. He travels to Maine, where he plans to spend the summer, because that's probably the nicest place to spend the summer when it's going to start getting hot. And that's when he meets Nadine Cross and Leo and Joe. That's what Nadine calls him, because he kind of acts very feral. He doesn't talk. He just walks around like in his underwear. He carries around a knife, And then once he hears Larry play the guitar, because Larry brought his guitar, kind of soothes him, and it gets him to like start like acting normal, less feral. The three decide to go and keep traveling back up to Maine, and that's where they find Harold Lauder's sign, and they decide to follow the instructions, and they go and he takes himself, Nadine, and Joe to Stovington, Vermont, and that's when they meet Lucy Swan. And once they get to Stovington, they find more directions from Harold telling them to go to Nebraska. And that's when he's like, yeah, okay, cool. So these dreams aren't just dreams. There's something else. So he decides, as kind of this like group leader, as they keep going, they start getting more people in their group. They're going to Nebraska because they want to meet this Mother Abigail who keeps showing up in their dreams. And initially, Larry has some feelings for Nadine, but she spurns every one of his advances, and he gets upset, like, I feel like you like me, and she's like, I do, and he's like, well, then why can't we be together? And she gives these like weird, ominous, like different like excuses and other stuff, and it's just like, come on, what's the right, like, what's the big deal if you like each other or not, or right, whatever. But she won't really give like a solid answer. So instead he settles down with Lucy, and then they kind of share like custody of Joe. Like, so he calls Lucy like his, I forgot, they like the something mother and the something mother, but whatever. So they're going on making their way to Nebraska. So now again, to kind of cut back again, so before the super flu hits, 22-year-old deaf mute drifter who's from Caslin, Nebraska originally, Nick Andros, he gets beaten and robbed outside of Shoyo in Arkansas by local thugs after this is just kind of after like everything's starting to, like, people are starting to talk. So he gets mildly injured in the assault and is initially jailed because they think he's the one who caused it, because like he gets beat up pretty badly. But Nick befriends the local sheriff and his wife. Nick expresses his desire to press charges against his attackers, because that's when the sheriff and everyone realized that it wasn't him, but that it was the other guys, because they noticed that like there is like a ring indenture on his like face, and the sheriff figures out who it is. It turns out it's Ray Booth, who is his brother-in-law. He goes out and catches them, brings them all in, and then he has Nick essentially become like a deputy because he starts getting sick. So the sheriff eventually dies, and then his wife ends up dying, who was also providing Nick with like food and stuff. So Nick decides, because then also in the jail, all the assailants start dying except for Ray, who's like, come on, you gotta let me out, like, because I think he lets out one of his other friends because he's like sick and dying, and he lets him go and he just leaves. Ray convinces him to let him out, but then he starts attacking Nick and nearly blinds him in one eye. Nick accidentally fires the weapon that he's got holstered, and it grazes his leg, causing the limb to become infected. But he is able to kill Ray Booth because he is very weak from the illness, and he has to eventually wear an eye patch for most of the story. And now Nick's on his own. He gets on a bike and he starts, heading towards Hemingford Home, Nebraska, where in his dreams there's this old black woman that keeps telling him to come see her, So he decides, all right, let's go. On his way there, he meets this very big, tall man named Tom Cullen. And Tom Cullen, let me tell you about Tom Cullen, okay? So Tom Cullen, although initially thought to be like in his mid-20s to 30s, he has a mild to moderate learning disability. So when Nick encounters him while cycling through Oklahoma, he learns that Tom Cullen remembers his father's return from the Korean War. So Anders realizes that he must be much older, perhaps in his 40s, and the two form a close bond, despite the fact that, you know, Nick can't talk and Tom Cullen can't read. So anything that he writes down, you know, he can't read it, so he obviously doesn't learn Nick's name for the longest time. So Tom Cullen's speech includes colloquialisms as such as my laws and laws, yes. And he frequently refers to himself in the third person. Cullen also punctuates important points, believing them to be spelled M-O-O-N, such as exclaiming, M-O-O-N, that spells Nebraska. So when he's required to make a logical connection, Cullen kind of slips into this kind of form of self-hypnosis, where he's able to make connections that he cannot while awake. And so like he just kind of stops and he stands there, and you'll be like, Tom, and that's when after a while it'll like click in his mind, and that's when he's like, oh yeah, and he starts saying like what he knows and what he's been saying. And as he decides, you know, I'm gonna tag along with Nick, while he doesn't know his name's Nick. I'm gonna tag along with this man who keeps talking, who he says, you know, he doesn't say anything, but he's just like, he gets him to go along with them, right? And after a while, as they're going through, they meet Julie Lowry, who is an unstable, sex-crazed teenager, and meets Nick in a deserted store. That's when Nick decides, or Nick has to give Tom Cullen Pepto-Bismol because he ate too many apples. But then she, being the little jerk she is, pretends that it's poison, and so Tom doesn't want to take it, even though like his stomach's like very upset. And so Nick is like trying to, and she I think she's able to tell him that his name is Nick at this time, and she like laughs at it for being stupid and this and that. And so then Nick is just like, no, you're not going with us, no. So they get on their bikes and they start leaving, and that's when she takes a rifle and starts to shoot at them as they're leaving the city and leaving her to be left alone. And we'll see Julie Lowry again. But as the two go and they keep heading towards Nebraska, you know, they get to a point where, you know, there's this storm and they have to, you know, reside inside a barn so that they can, it's a tornado and it just takes everything away with it. And they're able to get through that, weather that storm. And as they're going, Nick's thinking like, damn, we still got miles to go and this and that. That's when finally they see this car coming up the road. And in it, it's a man named Ralph Brentner. And Ralph is an amiable Midwest farmer and United States Army veteran. And he meets Nick and Tom on the highway. And that's when, I think that's actually when Tom's able to finally figure out Nick's name, because he's able to introduce them together, because he can actually read everything he's writing. And he tells them, like, hey, I keep having this dream too, like, about Mother Abigail. And so they decide, you know, we're just going to keep going straight there. And now I keep talking about Mother Abigail. Mother Abigail. Who's Mother Abigail? So Abigail Fremantle, also known as Mother Abigail, is the leader, or who is going to lead the good survivors, quote unquote, of Captain Trips to somewhere else, right? So, but she lives on a farmhouse in Hemingford Home, Nebraska, and she's 108 years old. She was born in 1882 to freed slaves from South Carolina. Abigail outlived 3 husbands and all of her 7 children. She's one of the 0.6 of the population that's immune. And she's the one that everyone's been having dreams about, as opposed to the Dark Man, or he's also called the Walking Man. And he's drawing all the dark, evil people, whatever, to somewhere else, somewhere out west. She and her followers, once people start arriving, they decide that they're going to go to Boulder, Colorado, where to establish something again there. But we'll get to that. Now, once again, to cut all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic prior to, there's Lloyd Henry, who is a petty criminal and once imprisoned for attempted rape. He, along with Andrew Polk Freeman, engaged in a killing spree across Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico, resulting in 6 murders. And they get to a point I believe here in Arizona, that's where I am. They get to a gas station, and Polk is kind of like this guy who's like ready to shoot, off the handle, like not mean or anything, but he's just ready to pull the trigger. So he ends up killing the gas station attendant, and I believe the people inside, and then they're about to take their car when like the police show up, and they have a whole showdown, and Polk gets his head blown off. And Lloyd decides, you know what, I'm not about all that, so he decides to give up, and he goes to a detention center in Phoenix. If Lloyd undergoes a scheduled trial, he's likely to be placed on death row because there's a new statute that reduces the delays in appeals in the capital punishment process. But then the plague hits, and Lloyd's fellow prisoners start becoming victims to the flu, and eventually the guards, and I think their like protocol is to just, well, if the guards are getting sick, let's just leave them unattended. And so Lloyd, being kind of the smart one to kind of have resilience and forecast problems, decides he's able to keep himself from starvation by saving food here and there and keeping it safe for later. And then eventually he starts eating the rats and roaches or anything else he can catch, and we see that he has consumed part of the leg of his dead cellmate. This is in the revised and expanded edition. I know in the original one I think it's hinted at but not fully said. But Henry's there for a while. He's yelling, becoming delirious, starving, and that's finally when and here now we'll cut into the story of Lloyd with someone that we maybe should have talked about a little bit earlier, but you know what? I like bringing him up a little bit later because he's the antagonist, the true antagonist of the story. Randall Flagg, also known as the Dark Man, the Tall Man, or the Walking Dude. And he's basically the embodiment of evil, the diametrically opposite to Mother Abigail's personification of good, and quote unquote God in the novel. Flagg is the one that everyone has been seeing in their dreams, opposed to Mother Abigail. And there's those who they see Mother Abigail and they feel the good that comes from her, and they hear her words and they decide to go find her. But there are also those out there who are more willing to bend to a strong man, right? Those who just seek authoritarians, those who want someone to be in charge and tell them what to do, those who are just fearful, who are just timid, who are just, they don't know. And so when they see this man in their dreams, they're fearing him, not respecting him, but fearing him. And so they come onto his side, and he draws them all to Las Vegas. And that's where he starts building a community, starting to get everything back and like the power back on. They start getting, people back to work. People have more assigned roles. And we see that, even Flagg doesn't know really who he is. And we learn that, Flagg might not even be his name. That, he, before Captain Trips, he has no memory of his life he kind of vaguely remembers, isolated, violent, and hateful events, such as participating in the Vietnam War, Ku Klux Klan lynchings, race riots, the kidnapping of Patty Hearst, and a vague speculation that he was involved with the Charles Manson's family. And, most of Flagg's memories indicate that not only was he able to escape during the last moments of many of the events, that they also nourished his evil nature. And so Flagg, he's wandering around the back roads, and, he's got on like a denim jacket, and he's got buttons all over, like a pig that says like something about like the police, like pigs or whatever. And then he's got like a smiley face with like a hole in the head or whatever. I forget what else buttons he has, but anyways, he's starting to draw these people together, and so he goes to Lloyd. And now let's go back to poor old Lloyd as he's sitting in an Arizona prison, Phoenix, Arizona prison, and that's when the Dark Man comes to him, and he offers to free Lloyd from his prison. And Lloyd is desperate, but he's very suspicious that this might just be the devil. So what does he do? Flagg, he says, I'm going to give you all, like, you'll be my second in command. You'll be my right-hand man. All you have to do is just give me your life. And he says, yes, all right, I'll do it. Because he's like, or I could just leave you in this jail. And he decides, he doesn't want to just die in that jail with no one else around. So Flagg gives Henry a black stone with a red flaw in it to symbolize Lloyd's allegiance to Flagg. So, what happens? The stone, he closes his hand, the stone becomes a key. He closes his hand, it becomes the stone. He closes his hand, it becomes the key. He closes his hand, it becomes the stone again. He gives him he unlocks it with the key, but he's kind of like, Lloyd's taking it back because he's like, this isn't that type of lock. This is a lock that runs off of power, like electricity. Like, the key won't open it, but it does. And when he gives him back the key turns back into the stone, and he gives him the stone, and he opens the jail cell door, and Lloyd is able to step out, and free man, quote unquote free man. Now he's under the and at the right hand of Randall Flagg. Before we move the story further, we got two more characters to talk about. One is, let's go back to Nadine Cross. Nadine Cross is a private school teacher in New Hampshire, and she just had something strange and dark about her for her whole life. And eventually, once the outbreak of the super flu came, she came across an emotionally damaged young boy named Joe, and who had regressed to being savage. And when they met Larry on the shore, they first were very wary of him because they'd seen many people. They hadn't seen too many people, and the people that they had seen, just seemed like very bad people, and she didn't want to associate with them. But that's when Joe went and, he started to try and kill Larry. But then when Larry, woke up and, started talking to them and, started playing the guitar, that's when Joe, he started calming down and acting at least a little bit more civilized. And that's when him and her, they became, attracted to each other. She is fully attracted to Larry, but the thing is, she tells him that she has to remain pure, because there's something that happened to her years before that has caused her to, keep in that one thing of being pure. So that's what causes Larry to kind of cast her aside and go for Lucy. But he still, has that like love for Nadine. But we find out what it is that when she was younger in college, she had been on she got together with some friends, and they did like it's like a Ouija board, but it was more, it's not a Ouija board. It's I forgot what it's called. It, instead of like actually like sliding and spelling out the letters, it like it's a pencil in a planchette that writes out, and so like it's a little bit different. I forgot what it's called, but anyways, as her and her friends are doing this, it something is telling her that she must save herself for him because one day he'll come and she'll be his bride. And so from there, she's taken like this strange advice from this strange board that, you know, she must stay pure for him because he'll come one day and she's his, whatever that means. And then let's get on to one last character before we move the story in a huge way. Last and certainly not least is the Trash Can Man. So Donald Merwin Albert, who is also known as the Trash Can Man, is a man diagnosed as schizophrenic, and he has pyromaniac tendencies. You know, he's found himself in trouble over the years. As a youth, he had a fixation with fire, and that's where his nickname comes from, is when he was a kid, he had a habit of starting fires in trash cans. So the Trash Can Man received electroconvulsive therapy at a mental hospital up in Terre Haute, Indiana. And then that's one thing too, when he kind of, his mind kind of fractured permanently, right? Like he constantly has like voices talking to him, and a lot of these voices are always like the people who teased him when he was a kid, and like the people in town who would like be like, oh, look, there comes Trash Can, you better put your fires out, he'll burn down your house, because he burned old Templetons, because I guess he set like a mailbox on fire and burned their pension check or something. And so and then turns out like his dad died, and the sheriff of the town, or the local the police chief or something, ended up marrying his mom, and they sent him up. That's where they sent him up to Terre Haute, and that's why like he has like people also in his head telling him like, oh, you're going up to Terre Haute, and it's just his mind is completely just gone. And now that everyone else is gone, he decides to make a big fire. In Gary, he like when he's igniting these oil tankers, and causes all these fires, but it kind of burns them a little bit. And that's when he starts hearing, you know, the dark man in his dreams and stuff, and he starts hearing him like come to Vegas, you know, I'll set you as one of my highest advisors and highest men. And so he's like, oh, what, like, oh, and so like he decides to, you know, my life for you, that's what he keeps saying, my life for you, for the dark man. And so he sets out for Las Vegas. And let's just stick on that, because we'll get to everyone else. But as the Trash Can Man, you know, goes across the country, you know, we don't really see too much because he starts off in the Midwest. And so at a certain point, though, he does meet the kid, and it's mainly in the revised expansion that Stephen King wanted to throw this back in there. But the kid is kind of like the personification of Charles Starkweather, because I think Stephen King had a very a fascination with Charles Starkweather. If you don't know who that is, it's a serial killer in like the 50s. Kind of the inspiration for, if you've ever seen Natural Born Killers. It's kind of like that. That's kind of the story. It's like him and this young girl that he that falls in love with him go across a couple states, I think, and they killed a couple people. But the kid's kind of based on, he's got like that kind of 50s look. He's got like the slick back hair, and then, you know, he brings trash along with him. You know, he's driving him and stuff, and then, they get to a point where like he like forces him, the trash can man, to like get him off and stuff, and like different things like that. But they get to a point where they're driving, they get to Colorado's Eisenhower Tunnel, and there's just too many cars. He can't get the car through the tunnel because it's all blocked off. And the kid doesn't want to leave his car because that's his car, man. That's his thing, man. That's his whole deal. So he's kind of like, I'm not leaving. And then so Trash Can Man, he's scared because the kid keeps threatening him. If he leaves, he's going to shoot him because he's got this big old gun. And he's like, no, you ain't going nowhere. And so whatever. And he decides that because the Dark Man's been talking to him too, like telepathically, and telling him, like, I'm going to send wolves to help you. So there's these wolves just start coming towards the car, and Trash Can Man gets out of the car, and the kid's about to get out of the car to like shoot him, but then the wolves come and they start like attacking him and causes him to get back into the car, lock the doors, and Trash Can just thinks that they're gonna start attacking him, but instead they kind of like they gently take his hand in their mouth and start leading him through the tunnel, and the kid is just left in his car to essentially just die from hunger and from thirst, because he can't get out of the vehicle because the wolves are just there ready to get him as soon as I think he actually does try to get out, and he tries to shoot the wolves, but then I think they get him. And then from there, the kid, he keeps going, he's fully like, by the time he gets through, the Badlands, through Utah, and he's all like sunburned, and he's all like worn out, and he can see in his mind, Shambhala, or whatever it's called, Shambhala, or whatever he keeps saying, the symbol or whatever, or something. I can't remember what he keeps saying exactly, but he's like that. He's like there for like, that's the like paradise he's been waiting for, and like he's almost there. He's like, my life for you, my life for you. And he finally gets to Vegas, and he gets to one of the casinos, and he kind of collapses. And later he wakes up, and he sees Lloyd, and he's like, where's the flag? Where's the Dark Man? Where is he? My life for him, my life for him. And he's like, whoa, calm down. Like, flag's gone for a bit right now. He's coming back, but he told us to like just let you rest, and like they get him some food. He kind of like shows him around a little bit. He tells him like, hey, we got you set up. We've been waiting for you, Trash Can. And once everything gets set up, you'll start working, and you'll be able to see the man himself, the walking dude. So as we move along in the story, there is another character I forgot to talk about. We mentioned him earlier, and let me get more into him. It's Harold Emery Lauder. He's 16 years old, and he has quite the crush on Franny Goldsmith. And he's loved her ever since, because his sister Amy was friends growing up with Franny, and so he's loved her since he was a little kid. But he was not popular. He's very fat. He has a lot of acne. He's just a social outcast everywhere he goes. And he always writes in like the second person for some reason, point of view. But anyways, as everything wipes out, the only person he really cared for was his mom. And when his mom died, that's when he, like really broke and like started crying, and, like decided, with Franny, we're gonna go to the Sovington Plague Center in Vermont. And, he tried to make a move on her early on, but she kind of said, like, I don't really like you like that at all. And so, he kind of feels like he's still like her protector. So then, as they get on their motorcycles, and they go from to, he leaves a note in the roof of a barn, letting people know that they're going to Stovington. And then at Stovington, they say that they're going to Nebraska to meet Mother Abigail. And as they go along, everyone is leaning these groups are just coalescing in either Nebraska with Mother Abigail or Las Vegas with Randall Flagg. And once, Harold kind of reluctantly allows Stu Redmond to join their group, and eventually, Glenn Bateman, Harold kind of is like this, they have to kind of like walk on glass around him, because that's when Stu and Franny start to get to become romantically involved. And Harold, because Franny for some reason starts writing a diary, and she puts in there that they kind of hooked up and stuff. And it wasn't really like her fault, not really his fault either, like it just happened. And then Harold got jealous, and he's like, I'm gonna get my revenge on these two, because it's ridiculous that they can fall in love and she can't fall in love with him after all he's done for her. And so he starts a diary, right? And they kind of like also like Stu becomes like the default leader of the group, but they kind of have to like allow him to like pretend like he's kind of also like in charge too. Like they gotta pass the things through him. And as they're going to that, they're meeting people along the way, gathering people along. And then they come across a group that like of these guys who have all these women held as part of like a harem, and they get into a fight with them because they want to take Franny and like some of the other women that they have with them, but they're able to just barely eke out like a victory over them. They kill all the men who are part of this like group, and they're able to save some of the women. Like Dina Jurgens and Susan Stern, and they'll become important later. We'll get to them later, but also as they go along, the first people who are able to come as a group to get to Mother Abigail are Nick and his group with Tom Cullen and Ralph Bretner, and we'll see that they get to Mother Abigail, who's she's like gotten everything ready for them. She walked a mile or so to the next farm to get the chickens. And there were weasels, and she had to fight off the weasels because the weasels are his. And by that I mean Randall Flagg's. They're part of the devil's work or something. I don't know. And so she gives some of the chickens to the weasels so that they'll leave her alone. Gets back, she's all tired because it took her all day. Because she's 108 years old, I think, and like she traveled all that way, and for her that's exhausting. So, she has everything ready, and she meets Nick, and Nick has been to her in her dreams, and him in his dreams. They have become like, they have like this connection, right? Not like a romantic connection or anything like that. It's like God is telling her that Nick is the most important one, and Nick feels like she's the most important person now for them. And so they kind of come together, and he tells her his ideas, like like I don't really believe in God, and she says, but God believes in you, Nick. And so she explains that ever since she was little, she had this like kind of power, and we're gonna see this pop up in many books from now on. And I'll kind of just get out of the way right now. So she says that her grandma had it, and she had it, and they used to sit and have conversations like that all the time in their head. And so her grandma called it the shining lamp of God. And if you don't get what that references to, it's to The Shining. So yes, there are other characters in Stephen King's novels that have quote unquote The Shining, and The Shining is just telepathic powers. It could be any type of telepathic power. It could be like telekinetic. It could be pyrokinetic. It could be anything like that has to do with the mind, and different powers like that. So once they're there, Nick, Tom Cullen, well, not really Tom, but Ralph, and all the other people that came with them, they're trying to discuss like, so what are we going to do? We're going to settle here, and it's like, it's not big enough. It's just like a little cabin that this is like the last plot of land that her family owns, because they sold off the rest of the land. And, you know, like Nebraska's just this flat area, and, you know, it's not going to be the greatest place to be in. There's a lot of like space, but they have to build the infrastructure. You know, there's not really a lot of places around there that they could just like settle into. And so then she tells them that, you know, we got to go to Boulder because that's where God is telling her, or whoever or whatever, you know, is telling them we got to go to Boulder. So they set out for Boulder, Colorado. She says goodbye to her family home, and they leave a note saying, you know, that we've gone to Boulder to start heading there. And then, you know, all the different people, all the different groups, you know, that's when Stu's group comes by, and, you know, they see, you know, gone to Boulder, so they start heading to Boulder. All the little groups, and then, you know, Larry's group comes by and sees it too. But Larry's been following everything that Harold's been leaving, because Harold's been leaving notes and a trail along the way, and that's kind of what they've been following. And they finally get to Nebraska too, and then says go to Boulder. So we learn that everybody's been starting to go to Boulder, and they come to this one place, and they call it the Boulder Free Zone. And here now, you know, everyone's just kind of like going to meet Mother Abigail, because, you know, they've dreamed about her. So every day new groups come in, and they're like, they want to meet Mother Abigail, and they want to see. So, you know, Stu and Franny go and they meet her, and, you know, she's like, oh, you're gonna have a baby, and she's like, what? I didn't even tell anybody. And like, it's like, well, except, you know, Mother Abigail knows, because, you know, God told her. And, you know, Glenn gets to meet her, and then, you know, that's when, and then finally later, you know, it's like Harold is there, but doesn't really like meet with her. She just kind of gives him like a kind of a look, and that's about it. And then, you know, they start kind of settling things up. And then one character I forgot to mention too is Kojak. Kojak is a dog. He was found by Glenn like a little bit after the super flu broke out, and, you know, once they decided to leave, they couldn't take him along because they had no way to bring him on the motorcycles that they're on, so they had to leave Kojak. Poor Kojak had to stay there. But what we learn is that Kojak, we get his point of view. I love that Stephen King does this. He'll go to the point of view of like a character you never thought would have a point of view. So he goes to Kojak's point of view, and you learn that Kojak his old owner used to call him Big Steve, and when Kojak, you know, his owner died, he found Glenn. Glenn called him Kojak, so that's his new name. But they couldn't take him along. But, you know, Kojak, you know, being the faithful dog, because see, the flu actually did affect some of the animals. It affected dogs and horses, and so it killed off a bunch of them. It just didn't affect like cats for some reason. That's what he specifically says, like there's just a bunch of cats around now. But Kojak decides, you know, I'm gonna go after them. So he tails them from New Hampshire all the way to Nebraska. You know, he's sniffing them out, and he's getting them. And that's when he saw where Mother Abigail used to live. There's a bunch of wolves there, and they try to attack him, but he's able to, you know, to get past them. You know, he's able to take them all out. And by the time he gets to Boulder, he's all like limping, and he's a little messed up, but, you know, he's still Kojak, you know. And Glenn sees him, and he starts crying, and he's like, Kojak, you came after us this whole time. And, you know, there's actually a veterinarian who had survived the flu too, so he's able to, you know, get him back to ready, you know, good as health as he's going to be in. And so that's another one. That's like a little happy thing that Kojak gets to come along. And then they do find later a puppy, a girl dog, and so they kind of imply that like dogs are going to start coming back too, because they could start breeding with the other dogs that they find. So then, you know, Larry's group gets there, and Larry, you know, he's got Lucy Swan, he's got Nadine Cross, he's got Judge Richard Ferris. And the judge is he's an old man who used to be a judge, and he retired, and he's just been a lot of like, he gives a lot of like counsel to Larry, who's been leading his group. And Larry gets to finally meet Mother Abigail, but he's really, really wanting to meet Harold. And so he finds he runs into Franny, and he kind of is like, oh wow, like, because he finds out that she's with Stu, and he's kind of like, whoa, I didn't really expect that, because Harold wrote your guys' names together in the barn, and I kind of just assumed that you'd be his woman. And she's like, well, no, like, and she's like, are you sure you want to meet Harold? Like you actually want? And he's like, yeah, well, what do you mean? Like, he doesn't understand that, like, Harold's not the person that he's thinking he is in his head, but she tells him where he lives anyways. And when he goes to go meet Harold lives on some street off of the way where that like no one really lives. And so Larry brings him some wine to like thank him for leaving the notes. And like when he goes there, he like knocks on the door, and Harold's very suspicious of Larry, and like what are you doing, what do you want? And then he's like, oh, and then he brought him some like candy bars too. He's, oh, I don't know. So at this point too, like, Harold's been like cutting back on like what he's eating. He's like not eating as much like bad food as he used to. So he's like slimmed down a little bit. His acne's cleared up a little bit. So he's not as like I guess you're supposed to say he's like disgusting as he once was. But Larry's still taken aback by how like brash and gruff he is. And so then Harold does this kind of quick change where he's like, oh my god, oh my manner, where are my manners at? And so then he like takes the stuff from him and he's like, oh, thank you for this. And like he kind of gives him like that kind of smile that doesn't necessarily reach your eyes, like it's like that kind of fake smile, and like he's just kind of fake about everything, and he just thanks him and shuts the door, and locks the door. And Larry notices too that like, why are there's something weird, because none of us have locked doors, and none of us have like our windows shut, like the blinds, but Larry's house does. Very strange. And so now they're all getting there, they're all coming together. And they start to, like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to figure this out? Because people are just kind of wandering around not knowing what to do. So they start the ad hoc committee. And so they decide, we're going to get everyone together in the, I think it's like the auditorium, or like the main place in Boulder, like the, what do you call it? Like an auditorium. I forgot where it is specifically. But they get everybody together, and they decide that like they have like a list of who they want that they're gonna kind of present, and they're gonna have people second like these different people. That they kind of rig it so that they're like okay, like these people are gonna be the ones on the ad hoc committee who are gonna serve as the government, and we're gonna try and kind of push Harold out, even if he's able to like get someone to like back him. So as they're going, they decide to ratify the Constitution and all its amendments and everything, so that'll be like the new government, right? But then they like, okay, so like Stu gets nominated, Franny gets nominated, Nick, Larry, Glenn, Ralph, Susan, and that's when. And they want to put Mother Abigail as like the leader, but they're like, we really don't want to do that, because then that'll just be a theocracy. And so then Harold stands up and he's like, I vote to move that those who are nominated for the ad hoc committee are brought to in toto and whatever. And so basically he's like trying to get them all to just go and be the free zone committee. And they all agree, and so then that's the new committee. And so now they're in charge of like trying to figure out like what to do. So they decide to form a group like to start shutting off like the thing, because people just, when they died, obviously they left like TVs on, they left toasters on, they left their microwaves on, they left all these appliances and things and like things on. So things were drawing power, and that's what causes the power to overload and just shut off. So what they need to do is they need to go through, not only get all the bodies out and dispose of the bodies, but they also need to shut everything off. So they get these people to start doing that. Harold gets brought into that, and then they start getting people to go to the electric power plant, and they start like working on that to get the power back on, and they start like getting things together. Like they make Stu the sheriff. So he's like I don't know what it's like to be a sheriff, and like it's just like, you know, just make sure, because like, you know, there was a kid who got drunk who drove around town, and he was like barreling through town, like crashing into things. He didn't kill anybody, but you know, it's like no one's there to like stop people from doing reckless things because there's no like authority. So they're trying to get things back, and as they go through too, like they're just like cleaning up things, you know, shutting things down, getting things back in order, just so that they can get things back to normal. And that's when Harold, you know, he starts working for the, you know, to get these bodies out of the place, out of the like the homes and stuff, and they're gonna bury them. And you know, he starts meeting with these people, and you know, they start like liking him, and they start calling him, they give him a nickname, Hawk. And you know, they're like, oh yeah, Hawk, we'll see you tomorrow. You know, like they start like get like being his friends, and he starts having this kind of like, because he's been planning something this whole time, because he wants his revenge. I want my revenge. And so he decides that, you know, maybe he shouldn't be doing this. Maybe he shouldn't be you know, taking revenge on, you know, Stu. You know, I mean, Franny is her own person. She can decide what she wants. Stu's not a bad guy either. And, you know, maybe, you know, maybe we shouldn't be, I shouldn't be doing this. But then, you know, because Nadine, she decides to go to Larry and is like, come on, I want to be in a relationship with you, and come on, like you know, you want me, like, because she comes with no bra and a very thin t-shirt, and it's like, come on, I know you want this. And then he, you know, he rejects her, and because he's like, you know, you had your chance way before, and like he's like, I love Lucy now. And you know, he's kind of like, she's kind of like, oh no, you don't. It's like, and he kind of has, poor Larry, you know, he's had like these commitment issues, issues like his mom used to say and stuff. And it's like, yeah, maybe he does love Nadine, but like, and even though he may not have the same type of love for Lucy, but like, he does love her. So he's like, I'm not gonna do anything with you. Get out of here. So she decides she's gonna go move in with Harold. So from there, you know, she seduces Harold and kind of tells him like, and spurs him on even more, and is like, oh, that's Stu. Oh, he's ridiculous, and like, why does he get everything? He's not only part of the ad hoc committee, but he's also the sheriff, and this and that. He gets Franny, and he's like, I'll do anything with you, Harold. You just can't do that one thing, which is obviously, you know, where he can't. He can put his junk wherever he wants, except for that one place that needs to stay pure, for whatever reason she's been told. And so Harold ends up falling for this, and you know, she gets him to continue his whatever he's working on to get revenge on Stu Redman. And during this time, you know, Larry's been kind of wondering about like what's going on with Harold, right? Like, He's completely different from what he thought he was going to be. Like, he was just suspicious about, like, the house. So he goes to Franny about it, and they decide to break into Harold's house. Once they do, they discover, like, there's, like, a shoebox. There's these wires. He doesn't know what that's about, neither does she. And they break into, for some reason, the basement door is locked because they break into the basement. And he's like, why would you lock the door too? Why are you locking these doors? Like, in a society that's, like, you're the only one around for miles. Or, like, for like, blocks. Why are you locking your doors still? There's no need to. No one's going to break in and steal your stuff. This isn't even really your house. So they decide, that they're going to look around in the house. They look around. They can't really find anything. They find, like, a loose stone hearth in the fireplace, and they pull it out, and they're able to find his ledger, Harold's ledger, which he's been documenting his intention to kill Stu. And they decide, shit, we gotta tell somebody, right? So then when they leave, they put the stone back, they put the book back, they put the stone back, they put, they lock the door, they're able to lock the door and leave through the basement again, but they broke in. So, like, Harold knows somebody got in, and he goes to the hearth and sees that the ledger's still there, but he's still, like, kind of, like, shaken about it. And he was going to so he, for some reason, he was going out with he went out with Stu to, like, search for some stuff out. I think it's because, okay, so at this point, Mother Abigail, she goes missing because she's been, like, talking with God, and she finally comes to the conclusion, through meditation and, like, prayer, that she's been blasphemous. She's been the sin of pride, and so she needs to wander in the woods for 40 days or something. And so she goes missing, and so everyone's, like, out looking for her. And so it's Stu and Harold, and Harold has his gun, and he was about to kill Stu, but he doesn't. He because Stu tells him, hey, Harold, ever since you've come a long way from everywhere once we started this journey, and you're a really good man. He's like, I'm sorry about, like, what happened, like, with you and Franny, and, like, between me and her too, and it kind of takes him aback, and so he's like, doesn't end up killing him. So then they decide that when he gets back, Stu, Franny tells him everything, and Harold's like, I don't know if I want to do it, and, like, Nadine's like, no, you have to do it, and she makes him. She kind of forces him to do it, to execute the rest of his plan, and so, like, when Franny tells Stu this, he gets, like, upset, like he knows that, like, he was probably gonna do something, but he's also like, well, I can't just go and arrest him because of something you guys read when you broke into his house. Like, I can't just go do that, right? Like, he needs to actually do something. And so, like, they're like, oh, well, so they're kind of left there in this, like, well, what do we do? And, like, they're just kind of waiting for him to do something. So we also find out during this time that, they decide, like, what are we going to do about the people in the West, in Vegas? Because they know about this. They already know that because Mother Abigail had told them that, they're gathering in the West. They're gathering in Vegas, and she knows that it's under Randall Flagg, that they're congregating there. The evil in the world is congregating there, and so they're like, well, what do we do? So the committee together decide to send 3 spies over, and Susan Stern, who she was part of the harem that Stu and Franny that they freed, and she became part of the ad hoc committee, which is now the Free Zone Committee, and she decides to volunteer Dana Jurgens, who was also part of that, and Dana's ready to go. She's like a younger woman who they think like, okay, she'll kind of fit in, and she like goes around the mountains, comes from like the south, and says like, oh, like maybe like she wanted it, she just avoided going there, and like they have like all these whole like backstories planned for them. And so then Larry, he's like, I know this may seem unconventional, but he nominates Judge Ferris, the judge, and they're all kind of like concerned. They're like, oh, that old man, why would you bring him into this? Well, because that's kind of is like, he's an older man. They can have him go around like the north, come back down, and from like Montana around there, come down through that way. So it makes it look like he's coming from like the north. And they're like, they would never suspect an old man like the judge to be one of the spies, and they're kind of reluctant, but they're like, all right, yeah, okay. Because the judge is like, I'm all for it. He's like, because when Larry goes to talk to him about it, he says, yeah, Larry, like whatever you want me to do, I trust you. And for their third spy, Nick makes the even more controversial choice to send Tom Cullen, M-O-N, that spells Tom Cullen. And most of them are against it. The chief in charge who's leading the no is Franny, saying like, we can't send him. He's too much of a simple person, too much of like a naive person to understand what he's doing, to understand where he's going, to understand like when to come back. And Nick explains that him and Glenn have been doing this, and I think Ralph have been doing this thing where they hypnotize Tom, and when they hypnotize him, they're able to get him to do things like when they snap their finger or when they like clap their hands or something, that like he'll do something, right? Like he'll act like a chicken. So obviously he can be hypnotized into doing something. So all the committee gets together and they meet with Tom at his house, and they decide to put him under. And then like it's strange because then Tom, he starts talking in a different voice, and he's like, wait, they're like, Tom? And he's like, yes, this is Tom, but it's like, but not the Tom this is God's Tom. And they're like, what? And he's like, yeah, I'm down here. And they're like, oh, well, we want you to go to Vegas to spy on the Dark Man. Oh, and they're like, yeah, he's the evil one. When he spits, plants die, and when he looks at you wrong, like your kidneys fail or something like that, something like that, or your prostate turns bad or something. And they're like, it kind of scares them because it's like it's like another person living in his brain that's been hiding, that's like completely comprehensive and understands what they're talking about. And so they tell him, Tom, you're gonna go, and when you go, you're gonna tell them that you got here, we didn't want you, and we thought you'd poison like our bloodline, like not the bloodline, but like you breed with someone and have dumb kids and stuff. And like they make up this whole backstory, and they're like, and when you get there, just try to keep your head down, just watch out for things. And then, after so much time, once the moon's full again, that's when you'll come back. And when you come back, you'll travel at night and you'll sleep during the day. And the moon, the moon, M-O-N, that spells moon. And so they're able to get him to memorize this, and it works. He's able to like figure this out, that, oh shoot, okay, I'm going to Vegas. And so they send them off different times, and they let them go, and then things are getting back to normal. They get the power back on. They've kind of cleared most of the bodies. They've gotten things shut out. They're ready for winter to come. And so the Free Zone committees, they're getting together, and they decide, oh, we're gonna get together and like, you know, have a little bit, you know, start our meeting, our next meeting, and this and that, and they're all together in Nick's house, and that's when Nick, you know, he sensed something, and that's when a whole group of people like start coming towards the house, and they're yelling, "Yeah, woo!" Yeah, and they're all like celebrating and stuff. It's a whole caravan, and so then that's when everyone starts leaving the house. But Nick has this strange feeling, and he runs to one of the closets, and he opens the door, and that's when he sees the box, and what the box was is a bomb. And once Harold starts speak, he presses the button on a radio, it would detonate the bomb. And so from all the way up on the Anthem Theater outside of Boulder up on the mountain, and he could oversee the whole city. Harold and Nadine are sitting there ready to go because they're gonna leave because he's ready, and he presses the button, and just as Nick grabs the bomb and is about to toss it, it explodes and throws. Luckily, most of the people were outside the house, like Stu, Franny, and like Glenn and Ralph. They were all pretty much outside or like towards the front of the house. So when they get thrown out and blasted out of the, you know, a whole what's it called? A whole couch falls on Franny, but it doesn't do anything bad to her, like hurting the baby or anything. It just kind of gives her like a sore back. And, you know, Stu gets like cuts from like the glass and stuff, but, you know, nothing crazy. The only people who die in the explosion, we learn, are Susan Stern and Nick. And so now, you know, Franny's in the hospital because now they actually do have they for the longest time they didn't have a doctor, but they finally got a guy who was a doctor, and he was talking about like how like what he'd seen during the pandemic, but now like he's taking care of her and explaining, you know, like Mother Abigail, that's what the whole caravan was, that they found her, that she came back, and that it's because God had told her to come back because something bad was going to happen. And she's like completely wasted. She's almost down to nothing. Like she has no more bones, no more fat. Like she's like skin and bones. She's literally about to die. So they bring Franny to see Mother Abigail, and they bring all the rest of the committee that's left. It's just Stu, Franny, Larry, Glenn, Ralph, and Lucy, and I think that's about it. And at this point too, like a little bit before, we finally learned when Joe met Mother Abigail for the first time that his name wasn't Joe, his name was Leo Rockway, and that he starts becoming less feral and more himself. But then once Nadine like starts going with with Harold, that's when he starts kind of reverting back. But then now he's back to being Leo more now that Mother Abigail's come back. And so they're meeting together with Mother Abigail in her house, and they're like trying to figure out like what do we do? Like what do we do now? You know, the committee has been torn apart. We sent off these spies, and how do we deal with it, right? And so Mother Abigail decides that, and she's like, I'm sorry, you know, to like Lucy and to Franny, and she's like, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to let them go because we need to send what's left. She's like, it should have been Nick. Nick should have been the one to lead you, but Stu, you're gonna have to lead. It's gonna have to be you, and then Larry, and then after that, Ralph, and then Glenn, and you four are gonna have to travel right now as we speak. After I'm done talking, because I'm not gonna be much longer after telling you this. Like I'm gonna be dead after this. That you need to go, and you need to travel there right now with what you got on. Don't bring anything with you. You're gonna just go to Vegas. You're gonna confront the Dark Man, Randall Flagg, and you're gonna stop him. And you know, Franny's and Lucy are like, no, we're not letting you go. We're not letting you do this. Like, that's just crazy. And you know, Mother Abigail's like, no, there's nothing you can do. That's what they got to do in order to stop the evil in this world. And so, you know, Larry is able to convince Lucy, and then, but the thing is, Franny's still like, no, Stu, you can't go. Like, I don't care what that old lady says. I don't want you to go. So they decide. He's like, I know, like, you don't want me to go, but I have to. And so they end up leaving right then and there. It's Stu, Larry, Glenn, and Ralph, along with Kojak. They head out west towards Las Vegas. So during this whole time in Vegas, Randall Flagg has gotten the power back on. He got it back on right away. He got everything situated. He put down the rule of basically a dictator. You know, like, there's no drugs, there's no drinking, you break any of the laws, you get crucified. You do anything bad, crucified. And it's a way of, you know, dominating everything and keeping control as a strong man would, right? But he kind of goes here and there and disappears. We find out that he brings everyone in, he has the trash can man. He wants him to go out and like start like getting the fighter jets that are there at what is it, Nellis, that's outside of Vegas. You know, just start getting that ready. You start getting the bombs ready. Start getting, you know, if he can find any nuclear weapons, get those. You know, but Trash Can, obviously being schizophrenic and just insane, you know, like, he doesn't take well with like others. He thinks that they're essentially making fun of him. So like they're like horsing around with him, you know, teasing him a little bit, but they think that like he thinks that they're just making fun of him like everyone used to do. And so what does he do? He rigs up all the planes and all the bombs that they have to self-destruct. He sets them all off. And, you know, so let's get back to Harold and Nadine really quick. So they leave as soon as the bomb goes off, and they're traveling. And as they're traveling along the way they're getting into like outside of Boulder and outside of Colorado, across the mountains. That's when Nadine kind of is told like, hey, you don't need Harold anymore. And so Harold is kind of he sees like a vision of someone standing in like the road. It turns out it's Randall Flagg making it so that like he like goes too far off he's on a bend in like the mountains, so he hits and like flips over and he slides down the mountain, and he's like, his like legs all broken up and his arms and everything, and like he's got his gun, and like he's like yelling for Nadine to help him, like, help me, Nadine, throw down the rope. And she just kind of laughs at him, and he tries to like shoot her because he's like, you dumb bitch. And she like gets like freaked out and like rides off. And so he's just there. He tries climbing, he climbs his way up like halfway, and then he starts sliding back down, and there's no way for him to get back up. You know, he's bleeding too bad, he's going into shock. So he pulls out like his pad of paper, and he starts writing like a note to Stu, if Stu or whoever finds it, you know, like saying like he's sorry for what he did and this and that, and he ends up killing himself. And so then Nadine's left alone to travel, and she gets to a point in the desert where that's when Randall Flagg meets her, and that's who she's been waiting for to be pure for this whole time, because Randall Flagg needs an heir. And so he's like, you needed to stay pure for me. Like, and so like she's caught up in him in a way that like she's like she's had this idea of like he's going to be like this man who she'll love and all this stuff, but then like she like starts like looking at him more and starts seeing the evilness in him. And when, you know, they go to like have sex, that's when she's like, oh no, wait, you know, like I'm stupid, I shouldn't have done this. And like once they're like having sex, like she's like taking over, and like it just like completely wrecks her mind, and not in like a sensual way, and like it shatters her mind. Like her hair goes white, she becomes catatonic, and he takes her. And this is during that time. That's when Crash Can Man he's just been blowing everything up. And so by the time he gets back, they try and explain it to him, and he's like, oh, this is my new wife or whatever, and like she's pregnant and this and that. And then they explain like what Trash Can Man's been doing, and he's like, God damn it, like why didn't you guys tell me this? And they're like, well, I tried to explain it to you, but you were too you left. And then like they also find out that like one of their own has been like he's been using drugs still, and that's Whitney Horgan, and he was a cook in like the army or whatever, and now he's like a pretty good cook for them. But like it turns out he's been doing drugs still, even though there's no drugs allowed. And so Randall Flagg decides to crucify him. He does. And at the same time, he's able to sense out and like telepathically find the one of the spies that they sent over, which was Dana Jurgens, who's been sleeping with Lloyd to get more information. You know, she got her way up all the way to there. And so they bring her in, and Lloyd's mad because like, oh, what? I didn't even know you were like, oh, you were one of them. And like that he got like fooled. And so they bring her to Randall Flagg, and she has like a spring-loaded knife on her forearm, and she's gonna use that to try and kill him. But as she goes to use it, it like becomes like a banana, I think, or something. And like he's able to like magic it away. And then so he decides, you know, I'm gonna kill you. And so she decides that it's not for him to kill her. So she like, I think she throws herself out the window, or she cuts herself with glass or something. I forgot. I don't remember that part. I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure she kills. I know she kills herself. I'm pretty sure she cuts herself with glass, and she just kills herself. Oh, she rams her head through a plate glass window, turning so that the broken edge slices open her jugular veins, and that's when, you know, Flagg's upset because he's like, I should have been the one to kill her. Like, she shouldn't be killing herself. It should be me. And like this starts his like unraveling, and he's like mad, and he kicks her corpse all across the room and stuff, and kind of decapitating her in the process, and tells Lloyd to burn her body. And that's when you know, he's trying to figure out who the other two. He knows who one of the other spies is. He actually tells Dana that he knows it's the judge, who's coming from like Montana or something, but he can't see the other one. He's like, all I can see is the moon, MOON, that spells moon. And then he's like, she had seen Tom Cullen earlier too on a truck, passing on a truck, so she knew Tom Cullen was there. But she's because she kills herself, he's not able to see who it is. And so during that whole time, you know, he had sent people already ahead to intercept the judge. And so it's in Idaho, because he goes through, I know he goes to Montana, and then he goes to Idaho, and he orders them to kill the judge, but don't inflict any head injuries, as Flagg wants to send the head of any captor back to Boulder as a warning. And the people he sends there are it's Bobby Terry and Dave Roberts, and they're just two dumb guys who are working for Randall Flagg. And Bobby Terry ends up shooting the judge, but then he ends up shooting him in the head, and Flagg gets mad and shows up, and he kills Bobby Terry and and Dave Roberts, because he's like, I told you not to mess with the head, and he kills them. So there's two of their spies that are gone, and during all this time, things are kind of unraveling for Randall Flagg, and then that's when when he gets back to Vegas again, Nadine kind of coaxes him into like the balcony and like starts like telling him like all these things, like, oh, your power is waning, like this and that, and like how he's not as strong as he used to be, and like how his powers are going away, and like he gets infuriated, and so he grabs her and he throws her, and then like realizes what he's doing as he's doing it, but like throws her off the balcony and like falls because he's on the top level, right, of a casino, and then he's no, and like bam, she hits the ground, and killing her and whatever baby that might be in there. And so that's already done. He's starting to lose, like he tries to levitate, because he used to be able to like levitate for like a long time and like for very high, and now he can barely lift off the ground. And like people in Vegas are starting to kind of sense this, so people are kind of leaving here and there. And so during this time too, Lloyd comes across a young woman who claims to know who the last spy is, because she had met them earlier, and it turns out it's Julie Lowry, and she had seen Tom Cullen, and so she was like, I know who the last spy, and like they kind of push her off, and she's like, well, I knew, and I tried to tell you, and then like she does tell them that who it is, but Tom Cullen's already left. The new moon's already come or something, and so he's like traveling. But now that's when Randall Flagg sends out like search parties for him, and he does come across some people who are just like waiting, and they're like trying to find him. So he's traveling at night. He's doing the opposite of what they're doing. He's traveling at night and sleeping during the day, and so they're trying to find him during the day while he's sleeping, and then they're just like they're resting while he travels at night. But he overhears them saying like, oh yeah, like we're just gonna take this time we're gonna run, we're not gonna stick around with Flagg, because like there's something wrong with them, there's something, and oh, don't talk like that, he'll get you, he'll string you up, he'll crucify you too. And they're like, no, like, so some of them start leaving too. And during this time, that's when the four, Stu, Larry, Glenn, and Ralph, along with Kojak, are traveling to Vegas, and they get to a point where there's the road has been washed out, and it's created this large embankment of like a huge like canyon with very steep slopes. So the first person to go up, I think, is Larry. He goes down, like they all go down, and they all get down pretty easily. And then as they're climbing up, Larry goes and he gets up there. Ralph goes, he gets up there. Glenn goes, and like they're really reluctant about like getting Glenn, because he's an older guy and he might not make it up, but he ends up getting up there all on his own. So Stu, he's like, all right, well, I bet I can make it. So he starts going, but then as he's about to get to the top, he slips and like comes crashing down and breaks his leg. And so the other three come back down into the embankment, and they try and like fix him up as much as they can. They they leave him with some medication that Glenn had for her, I think like arthritis or something. So, and he's like, that's as much as I can leave you with. Like here's like some matches, here's some like some things here and there, right? And so then like they tell Kojak to stay with him, and he does. So the three travel on, and so Stu's kind of left there with Kojak, but Kojak's a pretty good dog. he goes and like he finds like rabbits and stuff and squirrels, and he brings them back to Stu, so Stu's able to survive, right? All during this time that the three keep traveling on, and that's when they make it just outside of Vegas, and a bunch of cars pull up, and it's like Lloyd and a bunch of other men, and they get them in the car, and they drive them the rest of the way to Vegas, and they throw them in like the local prison, and they're waiting for the Dark Man, and the Dark Man shows up. Randall Flagg shows up, and he goes to meet with Glenn first, because they have Ralph and Larry together in one place and Glenn by himself. And he goes and meets with Glenn, and he's like, I can make your arthritis go away, or I can make it worse. Like, I could give you all that you want, or I could take it all away, or whatever. Like, and he's like, Glenn's like, you don't fool me. Like, you're not as much of a strong Dark Man like we thought you were. Like, you're nothing like we thought you were. Like, your powers are waning. Like, you're not gonna. This isn't gonna last much longer, And so like he kills Ralph. I mean, he kills Glenn. Sorry, he kills Glenn in the jail, and poor Larry and Ralph are there to hold each other's hands and like brace themselves for what's gonna happen. And so the Dark Man, Randall Flagg, has them rig up like a stage for them to bring them out, because they're gonna rip them apart, not quarter them. I don't know if that's the right terminology. Well, they're gonna basically essentially like pull apart like their arms and legs. And they have this like rigged up, and he's like, see, like ladies and gentlemen, like he has everybody come out to see it too. He's like, look at, these are the ones who were sent here, and they're the ones who caused all the damage out at like the Air Force base, and they're the ones who did this. They're the ones who are causing all the issues and stuff. And they're like, liar, like you like that was you, this and that. And so then he's basically convinced most of them to believe that they're the ones who are causing all the problems that they're having. But then there's other people who they start speaking out and start saying like, we see the signs, we see like your power waning, we're leaving. And so just really quick to cut into, we have to go back to the Trash Can Man. So after the Trash Can Man blew up all the planes and the bombs and stuff, he decided to kind of wander around in the desert, because he was going to find the big one for him as a means to say sorry. He ends up finding a secret like nuclear base out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and he breaks in. He's able to like break through all their security that they had, and he finds it. He finds a nuclear warhead, and he pulls it out. And all this time he's been traveling through the desert, getting back to Vegas, and now the sea of people who are watching in the audience start parting. But at the same time, Randall Flagg is talking to his defectors, and they're like saying like, we're leaving. We're like, if you guys want to like survive, you need to leave now too. But Flagg, he like shoots like an energy ball at them, causing them to die. But the ball kind of like bounces off and like starts. It's still there. It's like kind of flying around, but it kills like the people that are like saying that they're leaving. But then the crowd parts enough that the Trash Can Man pulls up, and he's there, and he's all, my life for you, for the Dark Man, and for Randall Flagg, like, and he's literally decaying from radiation poisoning. Like, I don't understand how he's still alive. Like, he's just like melting at that point, like from the radiation, and everyone's just fleeing and scattering as they see that it's a nuclear warhead. And Randall Flagg's like, whoa, like, oh shit, like I didn't mean for him to bring that here. And then we see that the ball that he had shot out starts to morph, and it becomes, and that's when Larry and Ralph they're strung up, but they're like, oh, this is it. And they notice that it turns into like a hand, and it's like it's the hand of God. And so like it goes onto the nuclear warhead, and Larry says bye to Ralph, and Ralph says bye to Larry, and they're like ready to go. And that's when like they look at Randall Flagg, and he all of a sudden becomes like something, like he looks like something else, and then like disappears. It's just his clothing, and then the warhead just goes off, and it's just a sweeping cloud of light and destruction, and everything is gone. So then eventually Tom Cullen comes across, as he's going back to Boulder, he comes across Stu, and he finds that Stu's still alive, but he's really sick. He's got like just an infection that's from his broken leg, and they need to get him some medication, and it turns out like luckily the wind was blowing a certain way. It was blowing back west, so none of the fallout's gonna hit them, but they need to get out of there soon because that fallout could move the other way and start hitting them. So Tom Cullen's able to get him out of the wash back up the other way with Kojak, but as they're going, like they need to get into a car, and like I don't know if they're able to use the car now or but as they're going along the way, winter sets in, and like they're stuck on the other side of the mountains from Colorado and Boulder, and they have to stay in a hotel, and they kind of have to wait out the winter essentially. So but like as Stu, like Tom's trying to get him better, get some soup, but like he's not eating. He's just sitting there shivering. He's like in fever dreams and like whatever. Even if he tries to put him near the fire. He tries to do all that as much as he can, and it kind of helps, but not enough. And then as Tom is sleeping, he has these dreams where Nick comes to him, and now Nick can talk and he can hear, and he tells Tom like, hey, and he shows him, go to this pharmacy, and here in the pharmacy you'll take these medications, you'll take these pills, and you'll give them to Stu. You got to make him better, Tom. You need to make Stu better. And then then he gets up and he does. He goes to the pharmacy, and he's able to find the drugs, and he gives them to Stu. And then Stu's kind of like, how do you know that these are the right drugs? And Tom tells him, there's Nick. Nick's been showing me in my dreams, and in my dreams he can talk. In my dreams he can hear me. And so he kind of pushes it off, but he starts taking the medication anyways because it's actually the right medication. And after a while, they're still stuck. They're stuck in literally in like this hotel all of the winter. So it gets to be like Christmas time, and like I think Stu's like way better now. Like I think he still has like a broken, like his leg, I don't know, it's like fully healed. I don't think it's like fully healed at this point, but it's like enough where he can kind of get up and move around. And he like sets up a projector, and he plays a movie for Tom, and they give each other like gifts, and like even Kojak gets a gift. And so then like finally, like as like January moves, or December moves into January, into February, that's when they're like, the snow's like gone enough to where they're like, okay, well, we can probably get like if we can get into a car, and if you seat me in a way I can work the pedals, and I can drive, because Tom Cullen can't drive. So he's like, I can drive. And so what they decide, they do get to a car. They find that it does have enough gas. But it is I think it's manual, so they're able to pop the clutch so that they can get it to go. Like they don't have to like start the car. or not start the car. However you get the manual car to go if you pop the clutch, and they're like at first it doesn't work, and then it doesn't work again, and they're like, this one doesn't work. I don't think we're gonna be able to do it, but then they're able to get it to pop, and like they get it to go, and like they drive for a while, with that car. I think they're able to get to a point where they find like what do you call it? Like it's not a ski mobile, but like the bigger ones that they're able to like hold people, and like they move, like they're able to move through the snow and push through the snowmobile. I don't know what it's called, but they're able to get through one of those because it's still like I said, it's still winter time, but it's just less so. And as they come to a part in the pass in the mountains, that's when they come across these scouts who were sent out from the Boulder Free Zone, and it was a character that was friends with Harold, who'd given him his nickname. I think his name's Teddy Wozniak. Maybe that might be in the. I don't know. I don't remember if that's exactly who finds it, but they find them, Tom Cullen and Stu and Kojak, and they bring him back, and they take him to the hospital where the doctor he like breaks his leg again and resets it, and Stu wakes up, and that's when he sees Franny again, and they're reunited, and like she's able to explain, like he tells her what happened on his end with being broken leg, and then like a days later seeing a flash of light, and like then seeing the mushroom cloud, and that everyone's gone in Vegas, and she tells them that like once they left, they got new members of the ad hoc or the free zone committee, and how like they've been kind of regressing back to like the old society, and there's like a guy on there who's a little bit more corrupt, and he wants to like start throwing people in jail, and he wants to go around with a gun, which Stu never did, and like they want like law and order back and all this stuff, and she's kind of like, I, as soon as you get better, I kind of want to leave. And then we kind of we learn that Franny's child is I think in the novel, she gives birth to a boy, and at first they think maybe the baby might not survive, and because one parent did survive, the other one, Jess, didn't survive, and she decides, like, oh man, I don't know what to do if the baby doesn't survive, this and that. I can always have another one with Stu, and maybe it will survive. But the baby does survive, proving that like the immunity can be passed on. So that's when she tells Stu about the baby, and he's happy and stuff. And she says that she wants to go back to Unquit, where they're back in Maine, where she's from, and Stu's kind of like, yeah, that's fine. And so we learn in the last little bit, as it skips ahead a little bit, where Franny's already pregnant with her second child, with Stu as the dad. They stop off at Mother Abigail's house, her old house, with the baby, and the baby is like toddling around, and they're kind of there like, oh, like, do we go back to Boulder like after this? He says that he might want to go back to Texas at some point too, but like, they're just happy to be with each other, and just kind of their own resources, and going back east, to check it out, and settle there for a little bit, maybe go back to Texas after a little bit, but as they're sitting there, Stu asks her if people will ever learn anything, to which she reluctantly replies, I don't know. And after this we get an epilogue, and in this epilogue we see that Randall Flagg, the dark man, the walking dude, the tall man. He wakes up on a beach and he looks around, and there are like these like natives who are dark skinned. That's the way that's described in the book. They come out of the jungle, and they're like amazed that this person's just sitting here on the beach. And how did he get here? And they start talking, and he smiles because now he has another group of people to influence and corrupt, and the cycle will just keep going on from there. And that's The Stand. I'm sorry that I really wanted to get into the story and tell you the whole thing, because I didn't want to just like give an overview, because there's just so much to the story. You have to get into each character. Every character, has their own voice, has their own ideas, has their own like way of dealing with things. That just makes it just so like amazing to me, and what makes this story, and that's what makes Stephen King, I think, amazing, is he's able to write like these different characters that come together, and that's kind of you'll see a kind of a recurring thing for his novels, and it's very important to the Dark Tower series, and you'll understand why like I needed to get fully into this. And it'll be like, it's going to be kind of like that with the rest of the novels, I'm thinking, because like when I did Salem's Lot, like there's not a lot to say. Salem's Lot is pretty much cut and dry to where it is. But like once we get to some of these other novels, we're going to have to like get a little bit more in depth with them. Some of them can be a little bit more cut and dry, like Salem's Lot, but some of them, we do have to get into a little bit more, because it's just that engaging of a novel that it needs you to not just explain like the basic summary rundown. It's like you need to understand these characters too. So this isn't really like a tie-in novel, like or tie-in story to The Stand. Like you don't need to read this to understand The Stand, but you do have to understand that he had this idea of this kind of like virus, super flu, kind of kicking around for a little bit. So he had a short story that was published in 1969 that's called Night Surf. It's a post-apocalyptic short story, and that was in 1978 was collected into Night Shift. So the plot is, on an August night on Anson Beach, New Hampshire, a group of former college students have survived a plague caused by a virus called A6 or Captain Trips. They believe the virus spread out of Southeast Asia and wiped out most of humanity. The character's outlook is grim. They encounter a delirious man dying of the plague and burn him alive on a pyre as half serious black magic human sacrifice. The protagonist, Bernie, reflects on this new world, and reminisces about the time before when he went to Anson Beach in his youth, years before the plague. All the members of Bernie's group have survived a virus called A2, which supposedly made them immune to A6. But one of the group, Needles, reveals to Bernie that he has contracted A6. Bernie admits to himself that deep down they know that A2 is not a guarantee against A6, and they will probably all be dead by Christmas. Bernie's girlfriend keeps up the pretense, accepting Bernie's explanation that Needles must have lied about having A2, so the others would not leave him behind. And, like, I think other than, mentioning Captain Trips, because obviously he had an idea of like, oh, Captain Trips for a while. And I like the idea of like, because in the book they explain the reason why they call it Captain Trips is like, it it's like it goes around from different people, like a trip to each person, so they call it Captain Trips. Honestly, you could kind of see like the seeds of that, like that idea of like, oh, like this, the world getting basically wiped out by the super flu, and then them needing to like do we become these like back to the old ways of like sacrificing humans on a pyre, or like do we become rational and understand that, you know, we're probably gonna be dead soon too, because we don't know if this necessarily caused us to be fully immune. And it's just kind of crazy when it's like, oh, so like is this where he started? It's like I don't feel like this is necessarily where he started, or maybe where he started the idea, kind of like let it like that dust mite to snowball into the stand, but I don't think it necessarily fully impacted, like, because the fact that like the only thing that ties it to it is Captain Trips, really. Everything else about it like isn't really like a tie to the stand. But I it is interesting that he wrote this short story prior to. It's not like with Salem's Lot, where there's two short stories that explicitly talk about, you know, one is about is like a prequel, and it was about like the inherent bad things that are in Jerusalem's Lot, and then the second one's a sequel which continues from the vampires taking over the town. So those are explicitly about being a prequel and a sequel. This one is just more of like he had an idea for, you know, this is the short story, and then, you know, he just decided to call the plague Captain Trips. But he was like, so I think he was so intrigued by like the idea of Captain Trips that he was like, yeah, you know, and then like taking all those other things into account, and he was like, yeah, I called it Captain Trips. I like that idea of like it took trips around, and, you know, that's where he got it. Now let's get into some of the adaptions of The Stand. It was in development hell for 10 years during the 80s. Stephen King had planned a theatrical film with George A. Romero directing, and with George A. Romero directing, and Stephen King writing the film himself, not trusting really anybody else with the project. In 1995, when the Complete and Uncut Edition of the book came out, King admitted he had a few fan castings in mind for characters, like Robert Duvall as Randall Flagg and Marshall Crenshaw as Larry Underwood. I don't know who Marshall Crenshaw is, but I do know who Robert Duvall is. Writing a workable script proved difficult due to the novel's length, obviously, and King talked about adapting it for television, but was informed that television networks did not want to see the end of the world, particularly in prime time. Eventually, King allowed screenwriter Rospo Pallenberg, who was a fan of The Stand, to write his own adaptation of the novel. Pallenberg's script was for an approximately 3-hour film, which King felt was true to the novel. After the script was written, Warner Brothers backed out of the project. ABC eventually offered Stephen King the chance to make The Stand into an 8-hour miniseries, and King wrote a new screenplay, omitting some parts for television, obviously. And the miniseries was directed by Mick Garris and broadcast in 1994. Between 2011 and 2016, Warner Brothers and CBS Films were developing a feature-length film adaptation of The Stand. And then in August of 2011, director David Yates and screenwriter Stephen Kloves, known for collaborating on Harry Potter, were hired to write and direct a multi-movie version of The Stand, but left the project in October of 2011 as Yates felt it would work better as a miniseries. Both Ben Affleck and Scott Cooper dropped out over creative differences with the studios, which I didn't even know Ben Affleck was involved in that one. On February 25th, 2014, Josh Boone was hired to write and direct the adaptation. later revealed that he wanted Christian Bale to play Randall Flagg and Matthew McConaughey for the role of Stu Redman. But by September 10th, 2014, the script had been completed and pre-production was underway. In November, Boone planned to split his adaptation into 4 full-length feature films in an effort to remain true to the breadth of Stephen King's sprawling novel. In June 2015, Warner Brothers proposed an 8-part Showtime miniseries to set up the story, which would culminate in Josh Boone's film. In February 2016, the Stan project was put on hold and the rights reverted to CBS Film. And then in September 2017, King talked of doing an extended TV series on Showtime or CBS All Access. In January 2019, a 10-hour limited series was ordered by CBS Television Studios to be broadcast on CBS All Access. Alexander Skarsgård, James Marsden, Amber Heard, Whoopi Goldberg, Greg Kinnear, Odessa Young, and Henry Zaga were all considered in consideration for the roles of Randall Flagg, Stu Redman, Nadine Cross, Mother Abigail, Glenn Bateman, Franny Goldsmith, and Nick Andros, respectively. The production was filmed in and near Vancouver, British Columbia, from September 2019 to March 2020. Filming was completed a few days before it would have been shut down due to COVID-19 pandemic. And production features Stephen King's own son, Owen King, as a producer and writer, and a new ending written by Stephen King. The miniseries was first broadcast in December 2020 and had kind of mixed reviews. And overall, I still love the original one, though they changed some things here and there. The original one, I think, is a better adaptation, honestly. I don't like that in the newer version from 2020, they allow like drugs and alcohol, and you basically in Las Vegas you can do whatever you want. Woo! It's a free city. Woo! And it's just kind of dumb because it's like that's not what happens in the novel like at all. And then there's just things here and there. I do like that they kind of add a little bit more to the ending where Franny like gets like trapped, like falling into like a, I don't know, like a water, like the well or something. It's kind of making more like Randall Flagg was getting his revenge or something. But overall, I don't know. I think it could have been done a little bit better. It was very timely that this movie was being made, or this miniseries was being made when, I don't know, we just so happened to go through a global pandemic, which was kind of reminiscent of this story. But, not exactly the same way. But the original, like I said, if you have a chance, go watch the original from the 94 adaptation. I think if you read the book and you want to watch the movie, watch that one first. And then I would say watch the newer one because it's just like, I don't know. It's just, you can feel like it's like they did some weird things too where they jump ahead and then they start telling the story backwards. And it's just like, I don't know why you're doing it this way. But whatever, right? It's still pretty okay. It's just, I wish they would have just been like, let's just stick to the story. I wish people would just stick to, like, when they're adapting it, like, we want to see the story. We just want to see it on, like, on the big screen. And honestly, I think it would work if you did, like, I don't know, like 3 2-hour movies, 2.5-hour movies. Then I think it would probably work as, like, a film. But other than that, like, if you try, everything you try and cut down, it's like, it's all important to the novel. Like, that's Stephen King makes things like important, intrinsic to what is going on. Even if it sounds like that's weird, oh, that wouldn't happen, or I don't know, just like these things don't line up. But he puts it in there no matter what. Now we come to the part of the podcast where I give my final thoughts on the novel, The Stand. I love The Stand. It's so good. I remember I remember watching the miniseries, and I love the miniseries. I remember reading the novel for the first time because my mom, that was the first Stephen King novel she read was The Stand. She found it she said she found it somewhere in like a bathroom stall somewhere. It was just like stuck, just in there. And she was like, "What is this?" And she just started reading it. And she just like, she took it and she was like, just started like, you know, like when you start reading something and you're like, you just can't stop. That's what happened. She just kept reading and reading because she was like, I was so intrigued by this novel. And the same thing with me, like, you know, once I got into reading Stephen King, from the first one was It that I read, and then I think I jumped to this because I was like, I know I really want to read The Stand because The Stand is another highly acclaimed novel of his. And this, like I would say, it would be probably like my fourth favorite of them all. I do love it. I do love it a lot. There's a lot to it. I love that he goes into so many different characters and we get so many different points of view, and we get to see like from before, like just before everything starts falling apart to when things are falling apart and people are like, he even shows what I love about the Complete and Uncut, because I think I read the Complete and Uncut. I think that's the only one I've read so far. I don't think I read the original one. But there's little things that he sprinkled in that didn't happen in the original one, like showing like people's point of view when like they survived, they were immune, but then they end up dying because of something dumb or something that was like their fault or something like that wasn't their fault. Like one guy, even though he's healthy and immune, he has an aneurysm and dies. Or like a kid who survived, you know, he's left alone, he's wandering around and he falls into like a well or something and dies. Or like there's a lady who's so paranoid about everything that she gets a gun and accidentally shoots herself. And it's just different people, different things happen to all these people, like little things that, you know, we didn't see in like in the miniseries or in the original run of it, of the story, of the novel. And then like things like with the kid, that was newer in the Complete Uncut. Like I guess it just jumps from Trash Can Man leaving the Midwest to him getting there in Vegas. We didn't see what happened in between. And then like there's just like little things here and there that I think he kind of corrected, and things he didn't correct that it's like maybe he should have corrected that a little bit. But Randall Flagg is such a great villain. I just wish he would have done more things. I mean, his whole what he's trying to do with this version of like evil, like so like the way he looks at evil, like with, okay, let's go back to Barlow from Salem's Lot. He's a menacing figure who's there turning people into vampires, right? Turning the whole town. And like that's a force to be reckoned with, right? Barlow's a big boss. The way I see Randall Flagg is, at least when we'll get back to Randall Flagg, right, later, if you know what I mean. But the way I see Randall Flagg in this is like, yeah, he's this ultimate evil, this big bad, kind of like Sauron, you know. They're like looking out with the eye of Sauron, like looking out across everything. But you know, he doesn't really do a lot. Like he doesn't like kill a lot of people. He doesn't use a lot of magic. When we do see him use these, like do these things, like he does kill like Bobby Terry and Dave Roberts. And we do see him do like other things, right? We see him do magic and stuff, but it's nothing too crazy. Like Stu never has to confront him, right? The way I see Stu is more of like Aragorn, like when you get back, you know, like Return of the King type of style thing, where like I don't even know where, or I guess maybe you could say he's Frodo, but he doesn't get to confront anything or do anything to like to push the narrative further. He breaks his leg and has to stay in the wash. And I mean, even when Larry, Ralph, and Glenn get there, they don't really do much there to stop him. It's just kind of like things kind of happen to, like, it was like, oh, like if they hadn't gone there, Trash Can Man would have just shown up with a bomb anyways. Would it have been like the same thing? Probably not. Maybe he would have used it on Boulder, but you know, we're not really sure. Especially when like it's like the hand of God comes out of that. That is another thing that I will criticize him for too. Is, you know, it's like that Christian kind of like thing that comes up where, like, you know, Mother Abigail talks about like, oh, it's God, and God's doing all this, and God tells me, and God and this and that, where it's not really like the devil is telling Randall Flagg, and Randall Flagg's not really the devil. He's just like an embodiment of evil. He's just this wizard that comes to, he's kind of like a mix of Sauron and Saruman. He's kind of like there to be the antagonist. But like, I wish like Mother Abigail or like even like the characters would be like, you know, like, yeah, okay, maybe it's not God, maybe it's the force of good and that tries to correct the force of evil or to combat it, you know. But like, it's just like that thing of like, I don't understand why it has to be Christian based, like God, like Christo God, that has to be the one that it's like, oh, well, that's real. Like, why couldn't it have been like Allah, right? Or like, why couldn't it have been like just like the reason why it looks like that's like, it could have been like, it looked like a hand. It not necessarily was the hand of God, but it looked like a hand to them because that's what they perceived it as, that detonated the bomb. I don't know. There's like, that's my issue, is that I don't understand why it has to be like Christian based. And I know that that's what, I mean, obviously he was raised Christian and to believe all that, but you know, I think for someone like questioning, using these novels to kind of question, using his writings to question his own faith, you know, for it to just fall back on like, yep, it was God. God did it the whole time. I just wish that they had a little bit more agency and more to do in the story, rather than just to be there like, well, we believe in God, so as long as we have faith in God, you know, we're safe. It's like, but what all those people in Vegas who they believed in God, and then they were just detonated and killed too. Like, not all the people there were evil. Like, they saw that the people in Boulder they were told that they were bad people, but it's like the same thing. It's like from their point of view that they're good. I know that Randall Flagg is evil, but you know what I mean? Like, from their point of view, like, there's like even like a little kid that lives there. Like, I think his name is Denny. It's like, man, that's kind of messed up. But overall, like, I love the characters. The characters are what make a Stephen King novel like just amazing. Like, the way he's able to create these like characters that you just pop out and stand out. And yeah, he'll give them catchphrases and things to say over and over again, but I still love him. I know that people will criticize because he will go off the story here and there too, to tell you about this or tell you about that. But I feel like for like something like this, it's necessary. Other stuff maybe not, but I still love. It's so good. I think it may be a little too long, especially. I feel like there's things that, like, even though it's the complete and uncut version, I feel like there's some other parts that you could have cut down and maybe cut out, and like the stuff with like the kid, I guess is kind of cool to see, but it's not necessarily we have the whole thing, or even like them. Like, I like how like he kind of wraps up the stuff with like them having to stay there in winter for a while, outside of Boulder, or like in Utah. Is that where it would be? Yeah, like on the other side of the mountains, like getting across the mountains, like that would be like correct. But like, I like how he kind of speeds that along a little bit, but there's some other stuff where it's like, okay, maybe you could have sped that up a little bit or get to that point a little bit quicker. But overall, this one's a solid 5. It's so good. I love this novel, The Stand. If you haven't read The Stand, go on and read it. It's amazing. Was The Stand a little too close for comfort? Would you have gone with Mother Abigail or Randall Flagg? Do you prefer the complete and uncut version? I definitely like the longer version. We want to thank you all for listening, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe to get every new episode downloaded. Do you have any personal or fictional, paranormal, supernatural, or unexplainable stories? We love to read them on the podcast. Please send your stories, recommendations, or anything else to horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to show more support, you can follow our socials on Instagram, Threads, or TikTok at Horrorbox Podcast. Also, you can buy me a coffee at coffee.com/horrorboxpodcast. It really helps out. Until next time, not every cough means you're sick. This is Dom, signing off from the Horrorbox.